Let's start at home now, though. And this week, the Reserve Bank left the official cash rate on hold at 4.35%, blaming an above-target underlying inflation figure as the reason. They've stayed like that for a year now. And there are still concerns we could see an interest rate rise before a fall, which is not due until at least mid-2025. And that's bad news for the government. For more on this, I'm joined by former IMF and Federal Treasury economist, now Senior Fellow at the Centre for Independent Studies, Robert Carling. Robert, great to speak with you. It's been a huge week. We'll get onto the Reserve in a moment. What impact do you think the election of Donald Trump is going to have directly on the Australian economy?
Well, there are two things to be concerned about, and one is what he's saying about tariffs and anything that puts sand in the wheels of free trade is unwelcome, and what he's talking about would be a lot of sand in the wheels of free trade, and it's especially unwelcome for a country like Australia that depends so much on trade. And the other thing is the implications for the American budget deficit and debt, which is already very high. This is, to be fair to Trump, it's not a concern of anyone really in the American political system. But in his case, I think his promises would make it worse at a faster rate than the promises of others would. But on the other hand, lower taxes are always a good thing, but I would welcome that on its own. But we have to be worried about what it means for the budget deficit of the US, because the US capital market is so important in the world. If they have higher interest rates, it's going to have repercussions around the world. But it's often said that with Trump, you have to take him seriously, but not necessarily literally. So we can always hope that some of the far out things that he's talking about won't exactly happen in that form, and they'll be watered down in some way. But
it's early days, I know, but it's early days, I know, but do you get a sense that the markets, the stock market and the Reserve in the US, the Fed, have baked in a Trump win and are already now working out what to do about it?
Well, I think it was probably judged more likely than Harris. So in that sense, it had already been priced in. But the reaction that we saw on Wednesday in the US markets shows that it had not been completely priced in, and they're particularly excited, I think, about the prospect of deregulation and a more welcoming or less resistant approach to mergers and acquisitions and that sort of thing, and also a less demanding approach to the big tech companies like Google, which was under attack from the current administration, and there's an expectation that the Trump administration will go lighter in those areas. So that was part of it as well, and just an expectation that the economy will grow faster, at least in the next year or two, than it would have under a continuation of the Democrats.
Robert, let's come back home. Jim Chalmers, it looks like he's at odds with the RBA. He's telling Question Time this week the central bank looks at the headline figure, but just a day after, Michelle Bullock spoke about watching the underlying inflation figure. Is he wrong or is she wrong? And can you explain the difference to us between the two different figures?
Well, the headline figure is just the average increase in prices across the whole consumer price index basket of goods and services. The underlying rate leaves out some things that are either volatile or particularly large increases or decreases, on the grounds that they're not a good guide to the trend because they're likely to be temporary or reversed in the future. And there are various ways to do this, but the Reserve Bank's favourite way is what they call the trimmed mean. In the September quarter, the headline increase was only 0.2% in that quarter, which was a very small increase for a quarter, whereas the trimmed mean or underlying rate increase was a 0.8%, which is quite a large increase for a quarter. So, and a lot of that difference came about this time because of the reductions in electricity prices from the rebates that we all know about. So, that's the difference. And the Treasurer says the Reserve Bank looks at the headline rate. Well, they probably do look at it, but they don't emphasise it, and they are steered by the what I call the trimmed mean or underlying rate. The Treasurer doesn't have a lot to boast about at the moment. He has good jobs growth and a low unemployment rate to boast about, but there's not a lot else on the economic front to boast about. So he's in a difficult situation, and as he talks his way through that, he's likely to make claims like that, which are hard to defend.
Just briefly, what's your best guess on interest rates next year?
Well, next year, yes, there's a Reserve Bank board meeting in December, and it won't happen then unless there's some cataclysmic economic event in the world in the next 6 weeks. So it's more likely next year. I don't have any special insights into it. There are a lot of people paid to pontificate on that, and February and May are the favourite picks for the first reductions. But there are other people saying it may not happen at all in 2025. So we need to remember that. And also, another thing to remember is that once there are reductions, don't assume that it's going to go back to some very low rate. It might go down to something like 3.5% and just stay there. So, reductions in interest rates they're a political imperative for Anthony Albanese, but they're not an economic imperative for the Reserve Bank unless they think the conditions are right for it. So they're not going to cut before the election just for that reason. They will be guided by the economic analysis, not the political imperative.
Yeah, I reckon the Prime Minister would be pretty happy if he cut before the election. Robert Carling, great to be with you. Thank you very much for joining us.